All right, so ready for a deep dive into something pretty amazing.
Always.
We're talking queer art today.
Love it.
And we've got Gemma Rolls-Bentley's book, Queer Art, From Canvas to Club and the Spaces Between, to guide us.
It's fantastic. Really gets into how LGBTQIA plus artists have created these worlds of meaning, from really personal stuff to like these big dreams for the future.
It's not just about pretty pictures, right?
Definitely not. It's about so much more than that. One thing that really struck me was how Rolls-Bentley connects it all back to her own experiences. Like how she always wished she could see herself reflected in those, traditional art history books.
That's so important. We all want to see ourselves in the stories we consume, right? To feel seen and understood.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're seeing how queer artists create those spaces where they belong, often through their art, and then how they use that art for self-discovery or even resistance.
And the way the book breaks it down is really cool, too. Queer spaces, queer bodies, queer power. It's like a journey through all these different ways artists express themselves.
It really is a journey. And that first stop, queer spaces, it explores how home takes on this whole new meaning for many queer artists.
Oh yeah, it's not just a physical space, is it? It's more like a feeling.
Right. It's about community, chosen family, finding that sense of belonging in a world that doesn't always offer it.
That makes me think about Zachary Drucker and Reese Ernst's photo project relationship.
Oh, yes.
They documented their transitions together and individually, and it's so intimate. Like home is wherever they are together,
Exactly. And then you have someone like Jarvis Boylan, who paints these vibrant scenes of Black queer domesticity.
I love his work.
His painting Bloom, for example, is all about claiming that sense of home and comfort, especially for queer people of color, who often have to fight so much harder for it.
It's like they're creating the kind of world they want to see, which actually leads to something that really struck me in the book. How many artists are documenting these spaces that are under threat, like Hannah Quinlan and Rosie Hastings and their film UK Gay Bar Directory.
Oh, yes.
It's this really poignant record of these gay bars that are disappearing all over the UK.
It's heartbreaking when you think about it. Like those spaces hold so much history, so many memories. If they disappear, where does that sense of community go?
It's a very specific kind of loss, too, I think.
Absolutely. And James Bartolacci gets at that in his paintings, like Spectrum Closing Party. It captures that energy of a club, all the lights and the movement. But there's this undercurrent of loss, especially with so many clubs closing during the pandemic.
Salman Tour's work has that same feeling, a sort of bittersweet nostalgia for something that's fading away. But then I was thinking, it's not always about being inside, in these physical spaces. Some artists find freedom and expression outside the lines, so to speak.
Absolutely. Those limitations can actually be a catalyst for creativity. Like, look at Jadi.
Yep.
He uses traditional Chinese paper cutting, but he depicts these like secret moments of queer joy.
It's so delicate and beautiful.
It is. But in a context where being out can be dangerous, it becomes this act of defiance too.
And then you have Sibello Miligini, totally challenging stereotypes with his photography.
His work is amazing.
His Country Girls series documents queer life in rural South Africa. It really challenges this idea that queerness is somehow un-African.
Right. Like your location influences how you express yourself, but it doesn't define or limit it.
Exactly. And it highlights how diverse queer experiences are around the world.
And sometimes, that connection to identity, it's found in nature itself. Like Jonathan Baldock, who uses felt and natural materials to create these whimsical figures, and they almost reference folklore and transformation. It's like queerness is emerging from the earth.
I love that. And then there's Roe Robertson, who takes it literally casting sculptures directly in rock formations. It's fascinating how these artists find that sense of belonging in the natural world.
Especially because it's a place where LGBTQIA plus people haven't always felt welcome.
Right.
It's like they're reclaiming it, making space for themselves and for everyone else.
And that sense of reclaiming space, of making yourself visible, that's really central to the next part of our journey, queer bodies.
Which is about vulnerability, defiance, and using art to really explore identity in a world that doesn't always make space for that.
Exactly. It's about carving out that space for yourself.
Which makes me think about the power of self-portraiture.
Especially for queer artists, it feels very vulnerable.
Totally. Like you've got Andy Warhol's self-portrait in drag, which is iconic, but it hits differently when you think about the context.
Right. It's not just about seeing yourself, it's about controlling how you're seen by the world. And then Chiffon Thomas's sculpture, Ruse.
Oh,
man.
powerful piece.
It's about Black trans identity, and it manages to be both vulnerable because it's so intricate and detailed, and defiant at the same time because of its size. You know, it's making a statement.
It makes you wonder, too, is it defiance from the artists themselves or because they're forced to defy just to exist in those spaces? It's heavy, but important. Speaking of complex emotions, the book then dives into how queer artists redefine intimacy.
Which is so fascinating because it pushes past that traditional romantic love we see so often. Like John Langberg's paintings are a great example.
They're amazing.
All those vibrant colors, the way he uses texture, it's all about celebrating the intimacy and sensuality of queer relationships. You can just feel it when you look at them.
There's an emotional depth there you can't fake. But then you have A.K. Burns and A.L. Steiner and their film Community Action Center, and it's like they're expanding our definition of sex and desire altogether.
Right.
This collaborative film, made with this whole community of queer artists, it's playful and thought-provoking all at the same time.
It reminds us that intimacy takes many forms, especially within the queer community, where chosen families are so important. But, of course, the reality is that existing in a world that's often hostile, it impacts intimacy. And artists like David Wojnarowicz, they don't shy away from that.
His work is so powerful, so in your face, like that photostat, untitled, One Day This Kid.
Well, I know that one.
It contrasts this image of childhood innocence with the realities of homophobia, and it's like a punch to the gut.
It forces you to confront the weight of what it means to grow up queer in a world that can feel very unsafe.
Yeah.
And you know, that vulnerability is present even in spaces of joy, which is something Mark Bradford captures so well in Death Drop 1973.
Oh, wow.
He takes this dance move, this symbol of celebration, and he transforms it into a meditation on the vulnerability of Black queer bodies.
It's like this stark reminder that even when you're celebrating, there's always this undercurrent of awareness, of resilience.
Exactly.
And then you have Catherine Opie, who kind of takes that a step further with self-portrait cutting.
Intense image.
It's confrontational, no question. But it forces you to challenge those ingrained prejudices, particularly about certain communities within the LGBTQIA+ world.
She's reclaiming power over how she's perceived. It's about demanding respect and challenging our assumptions.
And it reminds us that survival itself, for many LGBTQIA+ people, is an act of resistance.
100%. It's about refusing to be erased, demanding to be seen and understood. And honestly, I think that leads us perfectly into the next part of our journey. Queer power.
Yes.
This is where artists go beyond just surviving.
Yeah.
This is about envisioning a world where they thrive.
And it all starts with claiming visibility, right? Which artists have been doing long before it was safe or accepted.
It's true. Like, look at Hal Fisher, his photo text project, Gay Semiotics,
Yeah.
from way back in the 1970s. It's playful, but also super subversive. He's decoding gay culture, making it visible at a time when being openly gay was still taboo.
He's like, we're here, we're queer.
And we've got our own language, our own culture. We're not hiding anymore.
Yes. And even though he's controversial for some, Tom of Finland did the same for Gay Desire.
His work gave a sense of validation to generations of gay men when positive representation just wasn't a thing.
And it's still relevant today, even with increased visibility.
Totally. It's about owning your desires, your identity, refusing to be ashamed.
Absolutely. And speaking of owning your identity, Martine Gutierrez's self-portraits in her magazine, Indigenous Woman, are phenomenal.
So good.
She's reclaiming beauty standards, celebrating her identity as an Indigenous, Latinx, trans woman.
And reminding us that beauty comes in many forms. Those standards we're always shown are so narrow, so often unattainable.
It's about broadening that definition, making space for those who have been traditionally excluded.
Exactly. And, you know, in a world that often tries to erase or suppress queer love,
Yeah.
just celebrating it becomes a powerful act of resistance.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Ajamuex's photos are a perfect example.
We're beautiful.
He captures Black male intimacy with such tenderness, such beauty. It directly challenges all those harmful stereotypes about Black masculinity.
It's about reclaiming those narratives, right? Writing your own story.
Exactly. Renee Mattich does something similar in his photo series, Flags for Countries That Don't Exist But Bodies That Do. It's about finding your people, your community, creating that sense of belonging even when society doesn't offer it.
It's about building your own world brick by brick with love and acceptance as the foundation. And you know, I think that leads us perfectly to what might be the most hopeful aspect of this whole journey, the idea of queertopia.
It's such a powerful concept, this idea that Art can not only just reflect the world as it is, but also envision a world as it could be.
It's about dreaming big, refusing to let anyone dim your shine.
And one of the most striking examples of queertopia in this book actually takes us to a place that holds a lot of meaning for the LGBTQIA+ community, Fire Island.
Oh, Fire Island. Tell me more about that. What did the artist capture there?
Well, there's Tom Bianchi's photos from the 1970s. He captured this amazing moment of carefree joy, of liberation, this glimpse into a community that truly found its paradise.
It's bittersweet, though, knowing what was to come with the AIDS crisis.
It is. But those photos serve as this reminder of what was and what could be again. And artists today are still finding inspiration in Fire Island.
That's so cool. What are some examples of how artists are bringing that queertopia vision of Fire Island to life?
Well, there's Joe McShea and Edgar Mosa, who create these incredible flags out of colorful ribbons, evoking that feeling of celebration, that sense of community Fire Island is known for.
So cool.
And T.M. Davie.
Oh, yeah.
He does these pastel portraits that capture the energy of the island's queer creative scene. It's really something.
It's like they're weaving together this tapestry of joy and resilience.
Exactly. And, it's not just about recreating this physical place, but capturing a feeling, ethos. And then you have artists like Rakib Shah, Chitra Ganesh, and Twine Oji Odutola taking that queertopia concept even further, imagining entirely new worlds.
Oh, wow. Tell me more about those. What kind of worlds are they creating?
Well, Shah's work is unbelievable. He draws inspiration from Hieronymus Bosch to create these incredibly intricate, fantastical paintings, super beautiful, but also, sexually charged.
Wow.
You're stepping into this dream, but a dream that has this really clear message about challenging traditional power structures.
It's about reclaiming power through art, which feels so important for marginalized communities, especially.
For sure. And Chitra Ganesh does something similar, but with mythology. She rewrites traditional Hindu myths to center queer female narratives, giving them the power and agency they've often been denied.
I love how these artists use these existing structures like mythology and just totally turn them on their heads. So cool. What about Oji Odutola? What's her work like?
Her work is amazing. Imagine these large-scale charcoal drawings, and they're so detailed, so powerful. She creates this whole world where women rule and homosexuality isn't just accepted, it's the norm.
It's completely flipping the script on everything we think we know about power, desire.
Yeah.
That's amazing how art can do that, make you question literally everything. And speaking of challenging norms, I was really struck by how the book explores the digital world as a space for queertopia, too.
It makes sense, though, right?
Yeah.
The digital world bypasses so many limitations of the physical world. It's this blank canvas where artists can just build worlds from scratch.
It's like this space where anything is possible, right? Where your imagination is really the only limit.
Exactly. And it's so cool to see how artists are using technology in all these different ways. Like Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley.
Yes.
She creates these immersive video game experiences that explore what it means to navigate the world as a Black trans person.
That's incredible. What's an example of that?
So she has this one piece, Get Home Safe, and it's all about the very real dangers that Black trans people face every day.
Wow.
It's not about escapism,
Right.
It's about using technology to raise awareness and make people really confront this reality that they might not otherwise experience.
It's about creating empathy, making people think about the world from a totally different perspective.
Exactly. And then there's Rendon Johnson, who blends poetry and these digital landscapes in their work. Their film, I First You, 11/11, takes you on this journey through a surreal glass island. It's visually stunning, but also super unsettling.
Oh, what makes it so unsettling?
Well, picture this, disembodied heads floating around, animals just kind of existing alongside them, and this stark, beautiful glass landscape.
Oh, wow.
It's dreamlike, but with this underlying anxiety, something's not quite right. And then Johnson's voiceover, which is tender but defiant at the same time, just adds this extra layer of complexity.
It's interesting how even in these imagined worlds, these anxieties, the realities of the physical world, they still manage to bleed through. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, totally. We bring our whole selves to these spaces, even the digital ones. And sometimes that confrontation with reality, with that rawness, is the whole point. Remember how we talked about claiming your body? Well, Franco B's performances took that to a whole other level.
Oh, right. That was intense, wasn't it? His work. What made it so powerful, though?
He used bloodletting and often his own blood. as like a central element of his performances.
Intense.
It was definitely shocking, but it forced people to confront their own discomfort with the body, especially the queer body, which was so often demonized, particularly during the AIDS crisis.
It's about taking back control of your own narrative, even if it makes people uncomfortable. Refusing to be silenced, to be shamed, which, yeah, it feels extra relevant given what was happening with AIDS at the time.
It was radical. This active defiance of visibility during such a dark time. And, even in the absence of physical bodies, that sense of erasure, of loss, is so present in Kang Sung-lee's work.
Oh, his work is so fascinating. How does he do that?
He does these graphite drawings, but here's the thing. He recreates famous photographs of men, often gay and BIPOC, but he removes the figures themselves.
Wow.
So you're left with this ghostly outline. It's haunting, like a reminder of all those who have been lost, forgotten.
It's like they've literally been erased from history.
Yeah.
Which is, sadly, the reality for so many queer people.
Absolutely. And it makes you ask, whose stories are being told? Whose are being silenced?
Like, get to be remembered, right?
Yeah.
It's a powerful reminder of how fragile these lives are, these legacies.
They are. And that fight for visibility, for having your story told, it's so central to queer art.
Yeah.
Like, Slava Mogutin's a great example of that.
What's his story?
He was forced to flee Russia because of, homophobic persecution. But his work, he still documents the lives of LGBTQIA plus people in Russia.
Wow.
He has this one series, Lost Boys, and it's so moving. Just portraits of these young queer Russians living their lives.
Which is an act of defiance in and of itself in many places.
Absolutely.
It's a good reminder that queerness exists everywhere, even in the most hostile environments. And that art can really be a lifeline.
A way to find community when you feel alone.
Totally.
And to make sure those stories are passed down so that future generations know that they're not alone.
Exactly.
And, that brings us back to that idea of queer power, because it isn't just about individual visibility, it's about collective action.
Yes.
About using art to create real change in the world.
Right. It's about raising your voice and using your art to amplify the voices of others.
Exactly. Rolls-Bentley highlights so many artists doing that, like Lula Mae Blockton, for instance. She uses the colors of the rainbow and all these symbols of the black and brown communities in her abstract paintings.
Blending activism and artistry so seamlessly. It's really powerful.
It shows how art can be both aesthetically beautiful and politically potent at the same time. And then you have Jetty E, who has been documenting lesbian lives since the 1970s, long before it was as accepted as it is, even now.
Right. Her photos are incredible. There's a real sense of intimacy and tenderness to them.
They were groundbreaking. Her book, Eye to Eye, Portraits of Lesbians, is a landmark work in lesbian visibility.
That's amazing. And speaking of pioneers, we have to talk about Barbara Hammer.
Oh, yes.
A true trailblazer in queer cinema. Her films were so ahead of their time. What was it about them that felt so groundbreaking?
But she wasn't afraid to tackle really difficult topics, and she did it with this humor and wit that challenged gender norms and really celebrated lesbian identity.
Yeah.
Like her film, Super Dyke, is a great example. Playful, but it packs a punch.
It's amazing how much power a film can have. How it can literally make you think differently about the world. And sometimes that power is in simplicity too, like with Carolina Regula's photo series, Let Them See Us.
Oh, yes. That series is amazing.
The images are so simple, but they speak volumes.
They do.
Just portraits of gay and lesbian couples holding hands in Poland, where that act could be met with hostility. It's revolutionary.
It really drives home that visibility and representation matter, especially in places where LGBTQIA plus rights are under threat.
It's about refusing to be invisible, demanding your right to simply exist in public spaces.
And Gada Amer's work is another great example of that defiance.
Oh yeah, what does she do?
She uses embroidery, which is typically associated with domesticity and femininity.
Right.
And she uses it to create these really bold, erotic images of women.
Oh, wow. That's such a cool juxtaposition. What's the message there?
It's about reclaiming this art form that's often seen as lesser than, and subverting expectations. She's celebrating female sexuality and desire, but on her own terms.
Love that.
And, this celebration of love and intimacy is such a vital part of queer power. It's about standing up to a society that wants to dictate who you can love and how you can express that love.
It's about choosing love, choosing joy, even in the face of adversity.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really powerful theme. Love as resistance.
Yes. We've touched on this a little bit, but I would love to hear more about how artists are exploring that concept.
Well, we talked about Ajamu X's photos that celebrate black male intimacy.
Right.
And we talked about Renee Madich's photos, which capture that joy of queer friendship and chosen families.
Right.
But there are so many more examples, like the artist couple, Chiacchio and Giannone, for example.
How's their work like?
They use embroidery, like Gata Armor, but in a completely different way. They create these really whimsical family portraits that challenge those traditional ideas of what a family should look like.
I love when artists do that. It's like they're saying, like, nope, we're going to define this for ourselves.
Exactly. And their use of imagery, all the bright colors, makes their work feel really celebratory, but also subversive at the same time.
I love that.
And Yuki Kihara, who actually represented New Zealand at the Venice Biennale, she tackles these really complex issues like climate change, colonialism, through her Paradise Camp series. It features Fa'afafine, who are Samoa's third gender community, and it centers their experiences.
It's about making those voices heard, showing how interconnected all these issues really are, and how important it is to have diverse voices represented in these conversations.
Absolutely. And then there's the work of Paul Cadmus. His early stuff was really controversial because of the homoerotic themes, but later on, his paintings often featured these really tender portraits of his partner, John Anderson.
Wow. So he went from being censored for depicting love to really celebrating it.
It's a journey. And I think it speaks to how powerful love is, that it endures even when society tries to shut it down.
It's about refusing to let society dictate who you can love, how you express that love, choosing joy, even in the face of adversity.
Yes. And speaking of choosing joy, Jeffrey Gibson's textile works are an incredible example of that.
Oh, yeah.
He blends pop culture references with indigenous imagery,
I love that.
creating these pieces that are vibrant, playful, but with an underlying message of strength and resilience.
What kind of message do you think he's trying to convey with that blend of imagery?
I think it speaks to the complexity of his own identity, being both Native American and gay. It's about embracing all those parts of yourself and finding strength in your heritage, in your community.
Like those two parts of him are in conversation, creating something new and beautiful.
Yeah.
I love that. Now, in terms of photography, are there other photographers besides JB doing work around this theme that we should know about?
Oh, for sure. Nan Goldin's photographs are iconic. She captured queer life in New York City in the 80s and 90s, and they were raw, honest, intimate.
Her work is so honest, so unflinching. You feel like you're getting this very personal glimpse into her world.
Exactly. Her Ballad of Sexual Dependency series is considered like a landmark in queer photography.
Wow.
This raw, unflinching look at the lives of her friends, her lovers, many of whom were lost to the AIDS epidemic.
Oh.
It's heartbreaking, but also celebratory, a testament to resilience.
It's about finding beauty and connection in those really dark times, which makes you think it's so important to document those stories, those lives, so they aren't forgotten.
It really is. And younger artists like Charmaine Poe are carrying that torch today. She photographs queer Singaporean couples in these really romantic, dreamlike settings.
It's like she's creating this vision of a future where love is not only accepted but celebrated, which feels especially significant in a place like Singapore, where LGBTQIA+ rights are still so limited.
It's about creating hope, possibility.
And speaking of hope and possibility, I'm so curious to hear more about Matthew Stone's work. We briefly talked about it earlier, but I love this idea of these fluid, interconnected bodies that he depicts.
His work is amazing. Imagine these digital paintings, super vibrant, sensual, where bodies merge, blend together, almost to create this sense of oneness, of like collective love and healing.
Wow.
It's like he's saying we can move past these rigid categories and binaries.
Right. It's about fluidity, not just in terms of gender and identity, but also in how we connect to each other.
Yes.
I love that. So we've talked about how queer artists are reclaiming space, claiming their bodies, celebrating love, even building these queertopias. What's it all mean, though? What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
It's about hope, really.
Hope.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it closely, that's the connecting thread through all of this queer art, this incredible sense of hope. It's not just about showing the struggles, but about imagining a future where those struggles are overcome, where queerness is celebrated.
Not just tolerated, right? Celebrated.
Exactly. And it made me think about what you said earlier about how Queertopia isn't just about reflecting the world as it is, it's about creating a new one.
It's powerful, especially considering how marginalized the LGBTQIA+ community has been and continues to be.
It is, and it's even more meaningful, I think, when you realize that it's not just about the art itself, it's about the artists, their lives, the communities they build.
Right, it's bigger than just what's on the canvas or in the frame.
Way bigger. Speaking of, did you notice who wrote the foreword for this book?
Oh, is it someone famous? Honestly, I just dove right in.
It was Sir Isaac Julian.
Get out!
Yeah, he's like a pioneer of new queer cinema, so his presence here, it feels important, like a passing of the torch.
Totally, like this lineage, each generation building on the last. And that reminds me, Rolls-Bentley ends the book with this really thought-provoking question. If art is a reflection of society, what do the vibrant, resilient, and constantly evolving worlds of queer art tell us about the future?
Chills. Every time. It's such a good question, and it really stays with you.
It does. What will museums look like in the future? Galleries? Will they finally reflect the diversity, the richness of these experiences?
Right. Will they be these radically inclusive spaces where these stories are celebrated, not hidden away?
It makes you consider how far we've come, but also like how much further there is to go. And what about technology's role in all of this? Because we touched on how artists are already using it to create these incredible digital queertopias. Do you think that'll keep evolving?
Oh, it has to. Technology offers so many possibilities for queer artists, especially those who might not have access to like traditional art spaces.
Right, like physical galleries, museums.
Yeah. Imagine like putting on a VR headset and stepping into a queertopia that an artist on the other side of the world designed. It's amazing.
The possibilities really are endless. It's like art becomes democratized, accessible to literally anyone. I love that. But it also makes me wonder, what can we as viewers, as consumers of art, do to support this? To create that more inclusive future?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think for me, it starts with awareness. Seeking out these artists, learning their stories, amplifying their voices, challenging our own ideas about what art is supposed to be, who gets to make it.
It's about being an active participant in shaping that future, like not just a passive observer. It's about asking questions, even when they're uncomfortable. It's about being open to having our perspectives changed.
Yes, all of that. And it's about recognizing that queer art isn't some niche thing separate from the mainstream. It's an integral part of the art world, and it has just as much to say about the human experience as any other genre.
So well said. And honestly, if we want to see that better world reflected in our museums, our galleries, our digital spaces, we have to support the artists who are building it, listen to their stories, celebrate their victories, amplify their calls for change.
Because art has the power to change the world.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I want them to remember that queer art is for everyone. It's about expanding our understanding of what art can be, who gets to tell their story. It's about embracing diversity, challenging norms, and, like we've been talking about, imagining a world where everyone feels seen, everyone feels represented in the art that they experience.
Beautifully said. And as Gemma Rolls-Bentley so perfectly reminds us, art has the power to change the world. So let's keep looking, keep listening, keep supporting the artists who are creating those worlds, one brushstroke, one pixel, one performance, one story at a time.